And I hope that your battery is now almost complete. It is recharged. And I'm very happy to introduce once again Kate Chegnova and Mike Astbury. And we are going to talk today about this topic, to play or not to play. And whether games are really so important, or, well, are there any things which can be achieved only by means of games? Or maybe we will hear another opinion. Okay, once again, just to introduce people who are with with us today, Kate Chegnova, she is the owner, co-founder of Startalk School and a very experienced English teacher. I believe that, Kate, you work primarily with adults.
Me personally, only with adults. I've never in my life tried teaching a kid, except my own kid.
Okay, and Mark is also an experienced English teacher who works with different age groups, and he's based in Newcastle now. And also Mark is the founder of the website with games. Okay, so so guys, my first question to you will, okay, I'll stop sharing the screen, okay, just to see your faces. Yeah, so my first question will be, do you play games with your students? So any age group. Katya, Mike, who wants to start? Do you play games with your students?
So I can start.
I
yeah,
suppose Mike. Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't necessarily play games every single lesson, but more than likely I do. They're quite integral to like how I would have my lessons, whether it be a practice activity or the kind of creative outlet or something like that. Games are a part of my lessons.
Okay, Kate. Do you play games?
Well, I cannot exactly say that I play games with my students, and I wouldn't even put it like that if somebody asks me, because I believe we have a lot of activities that can be called role play games, or they can be called presentations, or different dialogues, pair work, and so activities that do keep students busy, preoccupied, and of course it's not only about reading and talking, but whether or not we can say that we should play games, this is still an open question for me, and I personally do not use this approach at my lessons. That's true.
And what about your free time? So if you don't play games at work, do you play games with your kids, with your friends? So do you play games in your free time?
Well, again, I'm not a big fan of games, and probably that is connected with the fact that it takes time to get involved and to understand the rules, and you know, to enjoy it, and not to have vice versa this intense atmosphere among your nearest and dearest, because everybody understood the rules differently and you start fighting instead of enjoying your time. So that is why we do play games that are well familiar to everybody. So I would say pretty corny, pretty trivial, but as for elaborating a new one, and when somebody presents my daughter, you know, this table game, for me it is honestly some headache, because I'm like, oh no, not again. So I'm a little bit old-fashioned.
Thank you. Mike, what about your gaming background, apart from your professional career?
Obviously, so I mean, I was making and playing board games long before I was a teacher. I play board games regularly. I play games online. I play computer games. I run role play games as well. So I'm like kind of what you'd call a GM or DM, where I run role play games for my friends as well.
Okay, so as you see, so we've got two people with absolutely different gaming backgrounds. And dear participants, if you have any questions to our experts, just feel free to type them in the chat, and I will try just to read them maybe later and to address them either to Mike or to Kate. Okay, and before we start, I've got one more question. What is your definition of a game? So it is very difficult to start talking about games if you don't really know what it is. Okay, Mike, can we start with you maybe?
So for me, my broadest definition of a game is very simply, it's where there are rules that you have to follow in order to play, and there is an objective of some kind. That's it, and that because that includes football, chess, a board game, playing the lottery and picking numbers, and where you have to make decisions. Follow rules, make decisions. In terms of teaching, it's less broad because you do want to differentiate between like an activity and a game. And for me, a game is where there is a game mechanic. There's an element where you are doing something that is beyond just an activity from the book, for example.
Okay, do you share the same opinion, or do you have anything else to add to the definition of a game for you?
Yeah, I can say that I pretty much share this definition, and moreover, I trust Mike's expertise, but I would just add the fact that it's a set of rules that everybody knows and shares. So like a game, I think, cannot be played when people do not understand the rules. So there can be a set of rules, but in case you don't know them or you don't share them for some reason, maybe you think it should be played differently. In this case, the game may turn into confrontation. And that is the biggest problem, again, for me personally.
Okay, and so the next question, which I'd like to ask both of you, is why are so many teachers skeptical about using games in the classroom? I've been working with many teachers, and I know that maybe like 1/3 of them only share this idea, okay, that yes, we should play games in the classroom, or we should play games every lesson. So why are teachers so skeptical about games?
Well, perhaps in this case, I can start, Mike, if you don't mind, because being academic director of our chain of schools, I can definitely understand that teachers, they are not 100% free in what they are doing at their lessons, right? And in order to be able to play games, you need to add them to your curriculum, and you need to have spare time for that, or especially allotted time for that. And whenever you are playing a game, you sometimes never know how much time it takes to explain the rules, to again enjoy this process, maybe to repeat it a few times to reach this success or like this mutual understanding. And when you have a pretty strict number of topics that you have to cover, not always you have this time and energy for this gaming part, right? Especially when academic directors like me are a little bit skeptical about gaming, and they would rather have results that are presented in figures, in personal projects that can be clearly recorded and seen, while gaming itself is a very it's the tool that is very difficult to assess. The result is super hard to assess from educational point of view. And okay, even if students say, okay, we had fun, but whenever you try to understand whether they learned anything from it, that is a hard job, that is really a hard job. And let's say in my practice, I have 11 years practice of being an academic director. I heard rather negative reviews that I really didn't get the point of gaming. Okay, what were we doing? I paid money for it, right? And the whole lesson we were just exchanging phrases, and my teacher said it was a game, so I didn't get that. So that's why very mixed reviews, very maybe high pressure from management sometimes I think may lead teachers to this mixed feelings and maybe lack of desire to apply gaming in their teaching process.
Mike, do you have anything to say in return?
Yeah, I've got a few ideas just from feedback I've had from teachers. Negative experiences, personal negative experiences with games. So if a teacher doesn't like games themselves, and what you described as having had bad times before when people argued or disagreed about rules, like that negative experience, if you associate that with games, you're less likely to want to use them in lessons. There are lots of bad games out there. So if teachers have the first, say, handful of games, if a teacher uses those in their lessons and they're just bad games, like poorly designed, not very good output, then that's going to have a bad experience. Some people see games as being frivolous and not worth the time that it takes to play them. And again, if they've had that experience with bad games, that might enforce that. there's a certain skill in running a game, in giving clear instructions, and it's very similar to running a lesson and to kind of giving instructions in a lesson. It is very similar, but it isn't the same. And I think there is a skill in learning how to present a game and explain it clearly for the players of the game. Finally, I think actually what you described of not having learning outcomes, I think that's a negativity too. I think there have to be learning outcomes for whatever you're doing in your lesson, and that includes games. Those learning outcomes should be clear. The students should know why they're doing what they're doing. And so obviously part of that is things like feedback and clear learning outcomes. So I think there's all sorts of reasons, but they're I think my kind of top reasons, I guess.
But Kate mentioned one point that, well, curriculum is usually quite tense, quite packed, and there is no space for games. So you have always just to choose whether you cover your curriculum or you play a game. So so if we still want to use a game in the classroom.
So for me, there's two things there. Either the game is this extra thing that doesn't contribute to your curriculum and is going to take that extra time that you don't have, in which case you shouldn't be using it. Like it has to justify itself. Or you can integrate it into what you're doing as a stage in your lesson, and by integrating it into it, it is contributing, and therefore you can justify having that game. And if neither of those fit, so if it doesn't fit in your lesson, then you maybe haven't thought it through as to why you're using that game rather than some other activity. And so that's how I plan my lessons. I plan my structure, is that the game is part of the lesson, not an additional thing.
Mm-hmm. But do you replace some activities from your course book by games?
I mean, I don't have any courses where I have to strictly follow a course book. I mean, some of my children's classes, they have a course book that I follow, but there are plenty of things that I look at in the book and think are not good enough. And so I will substitute those for either activities or games, like or other forms of input from elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so, there are still some teachers who believe that games, they give this kind of fun, entertainment, and engagement, so they add engagement to the lesson. Okay, Kate, and if you never use games in your lessons, but how do you manage to keep your students entertained and fully engaged into the process? I just wonder, so are there any other means by which we can get the same result?
Well, during our preliminary meeting with Mike, we did discuss this part about gamification, that the process is much wider than just pure game, having some maybe table set and throwing dimes. Yeah, there are absolutely different means. And I do believe that modern course books, they already have these elements of gamification. For example, when students have to work out some case study, some situation, where they have to maybe argue a deal or maybe reach a give and take and be like representing different parties and reaching this consensus. And obviously we do have that, but I just don't call it a game. I call it role play, So these role plays are quite common, and that is why if you pick a contemporary book with very fresh approach, I suppose you're always gonna find these elements in every unit, and that makes the lesson quite interactive and people involved. And moreover, due to the fact that I got my business education, I saw a lot of approaches such as facilitator mode, where you let the students generate ideas and never say like good job or no, that's wrong. So you do not assess anyhow, right? You just let them generate things and then vote for the best idea themselves. else and so on. So acting as a facilitator, pretty much letting them hog the floor, if I can say so. And simultaneously with that, there are approaches where they highlight, for example, pros and cons of a certain solution, and they give each other feedback. We always work with developmental feedback and of course positive feedback. So this kind of interaction, it penetrates the whole lesson, I would say. So it's not that, let's say, there is grammar pattern and people are writing and say, thank you, dear teacher, we go home now and we're gonna study your present simple rule, right? Of course not. But is it gaming? That's my question.
Mike, is it gaming?
I know. So I mean, I think you can have a role play that isn't a role play game. Like if you're doing something that is purely functional, that is a step-by-step like conversation that you'd have in real life, and there is no additional mechanic in there, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, that's a role play game. Like I wouldn't necessarily say that. And there are things like task-based learning and these types of activities and the types of things you described there that I would use and hope my students would be engaged with, that I wouldn't also just automatically say, oh, that's also a game. So I wouldn't just apply everything that is different to everything that isn't boring. I wouldn't just say that's a game. That seems a bit unfair, because then I'm just saying, oh, if it's enjoyable, it must be a game. That's a bit disingenuous. So no, I think there are other strategies you can use than games, especially in that kind of setting. But then, yeah, like I think I've got a tangent slightly, but
why would you choose a game in many cases? Why don't you do just an activity, an engaging activity from the course book?
Sure. So I guess a good example actually would be something like role play games, where yes, you absolutely can do, for example, a restaurant role play where your students take menus and role play that situation out. One person is the waiter or waitress, the other person is the customer, and that role play is going to be quite effective, and that's fine. But what I would do is to add something to it might be to have hidden roles, where on cards the students get something and it says, oh, I've got to be rude, or I've got to be very polite, and the other person doesn't know. So they're approaching the conversation as they would normally, but then they have to deal with someone who's either very polite or quite rude or a bit impatient or just bored. And they themselves are going to act like they would normally act, but the other person is acting a bit different. Now that's now a game. And that's going to hopefully the reason I would do that, and not just the basic version, is that is going to add different language, and they're going to react differently, and it's going to be a different conversation than it would. Whereas if you just do the role, as it was before, it's going to be that same conversation every time. And there's nothing wrong with that, but adding the game mix things up. There are unexpected aspects, and that just small challenge of asking a student to pretend to be rude suddenly means new language is going to come out of that. So that's why I would use a game in that situation. But absolutely, I would start with the basic version first, so they have confidence that they can do it with a bit of improvisation. I wouldn't start with the game first of all.
Well,
okay.
Can I just add something here that just a little bit to justify this approach of course books. It's never a pure line of behavior. They do send students to different pages so that they don't know the roles of each other, and in each role it is clearly specified what type of person you are supposed to represent. For example, you should show bad temper, or you should be quite angry, or you should persuade your boss that he's doing the wrong thing right now by implementing new changes. So pretty much that is exactly what you've just said, Mike.
Sure. So I guess in my version it would be a little bit more improvised, whereas I think the book often is quite explicit about how you feel and why, whereas this would just be oh, you're just being someone who's rude, and so the language comes from them rather than the book. But I agree, those types of activities in the book are very close to what I'm talking about. I guess the other slight change would be, in my version, if I then move students around and they get a new role that says, okay, this time you're being polite, or this time whatever, again, they're improvising something different, whereas the book can sometimes be a bit narrow. Of course, I use book activities all the time. I'm in no way dismissing them as being just like not useful either. I was just giving an example where there would be a difference. That's all. But I totally see where you're coming from, and you're right that those types of activities are in there as well.
But so I can easily picture in my mind adults who do these activities. But if we work with teens and they've got these role play activities, so you have just to role play this or this situation. So what would you do with teens? Will they do this activity?
Me? No, for sure. I'm sure that it's not possible. And I do know for sure that gaming with scholars, like, I mean, schoolgirls and boys, starting from 7, at least from the moment they go to school in Russia, and finishing with 17, without gaming, they would get bored and they would probably shoot their teacher second lesson by saying, oh my God, that's just nonsense. I don't want to visit your lessons at all. So in this case, of course, I absolutely have to admit that course book is never enough, absolutely, because they do need this diversity, they do need this creativity at the lesson, where the teacher shouldn't be the teacher in the direct meaning of the word. It's like a coach, like a mentor, like somebody who can be fun, right? And that's why in this case, I think gaming is certainly inevitable. I fully agree. Sorry, can't confront here.
I've heard this. Okay, word fun. Okay, let's discuss it. How important is it to bring fun to your classroom?
So
the question.
No, I think that's a great question. I think it's fine. So I like the question. So
I say that I'm a clown. I don't want just to entertain them, but
yes,
fun to be a clown or not.
I think there is a distinction. Yes, you don't want like as I've said already, like if there aren't learning objectives, if you're not, if you can't justify what you're doing, it shouldn't be there. So with that in place, of course, I want my lessons to be fun, interesting, engaging, all those words that we kind of associate with all these positive things, and that's great. But then that's never the priority. With most of my students, whether they're children or adults, a majority of my lessons are either as well as school or as well as work. So whether it's children or adults, in either case, it's something that they're doing extra to their normal working week. And because of that reason, in my mind, a lot of my lessons, they're somewhere in between, like a full lesson and something more akin to a social event or an event where at least it's something that they're taking time out of their busy schedule to do something that isn't work, that isn't school. And so I try to imagine that that's where it is. It sits kind of somewhere between this line of work and free time. And so I want it to be justified. I want it to be substantial, and I want my students to learn. That's the priority. But I do also want them to look back on the time that we've had and that they enjoyed it. So that's fun is not a priority, but I want it to, I at least want to consider that it should be there, it should be present.
Okay. But is there this borderline? Okay, so at this age we can stop playing games and we can go to serious studies.
I don't consider that there, because there's I've just seen it too many times, time and time again, that it doesn't matter the person's age, their ability level of English, how mature or not they are. There are going to be things that they do in the class that they enjoy, irrespective of their age. So I would not dismiss that out of hand. I choose games carefully depending on my class, but it doesn't mean with kids I'll play games, with adults I won't. Each class is unique, and so I have to plan my lessons for that class, and that includes how I construct, how I present, how I would run games in the class.
But I think you mentioned some negative outcomes after games. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Can you hear? I think that in our previous conversation, Kate mentioned that sometimes we might suffer from playing games in our classroom. Some students might suffer.
So I would always want a class that is an environment that everyone in the class wants to be part of. So if I ever did anything during a lesson, whether it be games or anything else, that it was clear a student wasn't happy with, I would want to talk to them. I'd want to adjust my lessons accordingly. That included games. Like if I did a game and a student clearly didn't like it, I'd rethink that approach. I don't think that would necessarily mean I wouldn't play games at all. I think that's unlikely. There's so much variety there. There's so many ways to approach games. But it's not impossible. Like if I had a class and they told me flat out, Mike, we don't like games, I'm not going to force it upon them. But that hasn't happened yet in all my years of teaching. So, but I have, of course, like all of us, had to adjust my lessons for specific groups. So that would be the case for me as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Mike.
If I may add about the age, you said, Yelena, about this bordering moment. I do believe in that because, for example, when we were developing and building up our school, we actually made a lot of mistakes. For example, first mistake, because we knew nothing about gamification, was when we organized communication club for 8-year-olds. So we organized communication club, and I mean it. There was a native speaker who had a list of questions, amazing questions, we thought so. And he started to ask them questions like, okay, guys, hello, did you enjoy your summertime? Yes. Okay, guys, do you love summer? Yes. Okay, what do you like about summer? Nothing. Sun. And oh my God, 90 minutes of torture. It was so horrible that I expected all the calls from parents telling us that it was, and it happened exactly. So everybody complained. Everybody demanded a decent book, as they put it in Russian, and absolutely avoid this just wishy-washy activity, not knowing what to do, because we called it communication club. So this approach clearly failed with this age, despite the fact with teens, for example, this is our leading approach. Communication club with a native speaker, where kids have an opportunity just to chat, you know, without these grammar rules, without like trying to focus on everything they're saying. So this is working still, but we did include these elements for this age 7 till 11, which is fully about gamification. So there should be clear rules, there should be clear structure, and kids are not, let's say, they are not prompted to be speaking because they don't speak, right? They don't speak because they don't have ideas at that moment that can be expressed within 5 sentences as we expected. So in my practice, and again, I don't claim that it is universal, but that is what happened with our schools, yeah, in Moscow. We have this aging part. So let's say gamification for primary school till 11 years old, communication clubs for teens mostly, so like starting from 12, 13 maybe, yeah, where they already primarily talk, but they do play too, a little bit, as you said, part of the lesson. And we have only communication club for adults, so this is the place where they talk, so they only talk, and they value that. I mean, our feedbacks from communication clubs are very high, and when we ask for some developmental thing like what do you want to be added, only once out of 1,000 reviews we got this, we need a game, you know, and like nobody else ever even mentioned it, that somebody wanted to play. They actually just want to talk. So in my experience, gradation according to the age does exist.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I mean, obviously, there's a totally a lesson I have with 7, 8-year-olds is going to be totally different from 12 and 13-year-olds, and totally different again with adults. So obviously, the sophistication of your lesson, the approach you have, is going to be very different. But at every stage, I have appropriate games. That's all I meant. Of course, yes, there's differences, yes, but at no stage are there not games that I could bring that students could play. But absolutely, yes, there are differences.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are all students psychologically fit to play games?
Yes. I don't have a long answer. Yeah, I don't think there's any.
And sometimes students get so upset and they even might fight after the lesson or during the lesson.
Yeah, like, I mean, my classroom isn't like a gladiator dome. Like, people aren't coming in like in fact, if you were to kind of look at the games that I have on my website, 70 to 80%, maybe even more, are geared towards collaborative games or creative games where there is a creative output rather than one which can be scored. So the output is a sophisticated like sentence or conversation or something. So like that's not something where you can say there's a winner or loser. And those where there are winners and losers, it's quite soft. It's more that the competition existed between the two teams, and there just happens to be at the end you go, oh, and that team won. But that's not the and actually when I have had, for example, very young children who clearly don't want to be in that environment, then I wouldn't introduce that.
Mm-hmm. So, Kate, what about your experience of competitive games in the classroom?
Well, you know, still while talking, I'm trying to find some appropriate experience. And of course, I can find a lot of trainings that are close to gaming and they are paid much more. So, you know, probably I spotted one more reason why gamification is not included in many lessons, because it doesn't cost the money people are used to pay. Are used to paying in our country, because a lesson is a lesson, right? And a training is a training. So it is a different activity that requires different skills of a teacher or trainer, moderator. So that is why it's like one more thing. Sorry, just this idea clearly now appeared in my mind. And as for the characters in this case, the trainer, who is a professional one, obviously can create this environment where all people will feel happy, will feel their motivation and their own feedback, yes, from this game, like some kind of outcome. But if we speak about classical games where it's about who gets the best score or which team wins and which team loses, right? In this case, I do find it a bit dangerous if such a gaming activity is conducted by an amateur teacher, or like not very professional, because yes, we had that experiences where native speakers promised to organize, sorry, it's not really about native speakers, I mean it's about any teachers, absolutely, but because we like to attract native speakers for these activities, it's our policy. It was not a game, it was strange, you know, bizarre, if I can put it like that. So without clear rules, and kids left these lessons puzzled and like, what was that, you know? What was it? And that is why I believe that it's better not to play, for sure, if you don't know how, or if you haven't practiced it 5 million times, for example, before you faced a new absolutely audience, or it is something crucial for you. But in the arms of a professional, I'm sure that all people and all characters shall be fine during this gamification.
Mm-hmm. So do you mean that not all teachers are trained enough just to play games in the classroom?
I would say vice versa. Almost no teachers are trained enough to be able to play games professionally. And I'm not sure that this is being taught at universities. I haven't had this practice, and now I'm teaching my students at a pedagogical university, and I see their curriculum. Gamification does not exist. It's not a discipline, right? And in my opinion, that is a sophisticated approach that must be learned, must be explained, and let's say maybe we still just need more awareness of that, and in this case we will increase our level as teachers, trainers, and then we will not even ask ourselves whether or not to play. But first of all, we should start from our education, of course, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Mike, do you have anything to add to this point?
Yeah, I think it's like any sophisticated or complicated approach that a teacher wants to use in class that they've not used before, where it needs to be considered, thought about, need to see examples, maybe get some ideas from colleagues, incorporate into your lessons. And yeah, games are just another part of that. And I think quite often, if you have, like, for example, let's say when you're first you're writing your lesson plan and it's carefully staged throughout, and that when you're first learning to be a teacher, that includes, you might include your instructions, you might include all sorts of details about like exactly how you're going to step by step teach your lesson. And there's a really big crossover between how you present a lesson as a teacher and how you plan that lesson and how you plan a game, like an individual game. It does have to be thoughtful. It does have to be, you do have to think about the process and the start and the beginning and like what the players need to know for them to play the game well and for them to play the game without getting lost or without getting confused or without mixing up the rules. And I think there's a really significant crossover to a good lesson plan and a good game, a well-written, well-designed game. So I think if teachers learn more to keep that in mind, that when they're planning a game, it should be as thought out as any like lesson. And that if they haven't done that game before, then just like if they haven't taught before, or they haven't used a particular activity before, or maybe if they haven't taught a grammar item before that's new to them, well, they would take that seriously and would think about it before they walked into the classroom. And they think that's that same way about games, where here's a new game, I've never done it before, right, I need to sit down on my own, make sure I know how to teach this game. And then, as with all things, as teachers, we get better when we do that, and we get better each time. So I think teachers are totally capable, they're totally ready. I think they just need to be considered when they start.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I put down this phrase. I think, Kate, you mentioned it when you quoted one of your students. My teacher said it was a game, and just this your student. Well, he or she, I don't know who it was. So they didn't feel that it was a game. They didn't play a game. They did some activity which their teacher said that it was a game. And again, just citing you said on Wednesday that the knowledge that there are games doesn't mean that you know how to play games. Yeah, and I think that, well, our debate it has come to this point where we understand that, well, it's okay to play games in the classroom if you know how to play them. And maybe the reason why many teachers shouldn't use games right now is just they can do more harm than good if they use games, maybe not in a proper way. I don't know. Would you agree to this point or not? Or is it just too...
It's a bit radical, but I think that, Yelena, that is your mission. That is why everybody's here today. You've been, for me personally, a leader of gamification, and I do follow your insights and your ideas, and even these things you gave us, I think 2 years ago, it's some training with horses, put a rider on a horse thing, Of course, I brought it to my students. What do you think? Because I saw how you did it, and so I brought it to my students, and you added gamification to my lessons, So that's why I do believe that if we listen more, if we meet such people as Mike, for example, with gamification approach and philosophy, of gaming, and speeches are very inspiring. So of course you feel like trying something new, right? And the only thing is that there should be some kind of help, provided, like assistance, somebody who can guide you not to fail, because still teachers with big experience, they are professionals already, and it's normal to be afraid. to try, you know, new things and to fail. Nobody wants to fail. Nobody likes to fail. Yes. So that's why just I think we are moving towards that, and maybe one day gamification will be just an essential part of absolutely all lessons. Who knows?
I would make the point that you said perhaps teachers shouldn't play the games and like use games in the classroom until they're ready. I'm an advocate for games. I think they're a very useful teaching tool, and I think they're very, very practical. And I don't think it's this huge mountain of a challenge to overcome to be able to incorporate them into your classes. All I would ask is that teachers think about the games they're choosing to use and why, and to be critical of the material they see. Just like when you look at a teacher's book, sometimes the activity you can see just by reading it, oh, this isn't really very good. I probably need to adapt this slightly. The same with games, to look at games and say like, I shouldn't just take this at face value. I should think about how I'm going to incorporate this in my class if I need to change it. And so like that's all I would advocate for, is to think of games as a tool like any other, and it depends on the quality of the teacher and the thoughtfulness of the teacher to kind of deliver on that. So yeah, I'm an advocate, but I'm not. What was I going to say? Like I'm an advocate, but I'm not some kind of acolyte, some like a maniac. Like I don't. The game's above everything else, but I do think they are useful.
Yeah, and maybe the problem is that very often teachers they just view games as an add-up to a lesson, but not as a tool. Yeah, and if they look at the game as a teaching tool, then they will plan all the procedures with the games more carefully. Like, why do I want
as maybe a clear? Sorry, as maybe a clearer analogy. There's a big difference if you're using video in your classroom. There's a big difference between just sitting your class in front of a video, pressing play, and letting them watch video for 10 minutes. And then at the end of it going, oh, well, that was a video, it is in English, and that's a good lesson. And instead, building a lesson around that video, like building a lesson around that video, incorporating it, making making that video a part of your lesson. And that's the same with games. I would argue.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Kate. Thank you for this conversation. Well, it was very interesting for me. I hope that it was just as interesting for our participants. If you have any questions, you can ask either Kate or Mike. Yeah, or you can just show us somehow that you liked this part of the conference. You can turn on your videos, you can clap, you can smile, just to charge Kate's and Mike's batteries as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. No hard feelings. This was my role.
None at all, obviously. No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, and actually we are coming to the end. So the last part of today's conference, it will be just to announce the winners of all our contests and all our games which we had today. Mike, I'm sorry, but can I switch to Russian now? It's just
okay. Just to briefly say thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Anyone can feel free to get in touch. I'll quickly put my website link and stuff in the chat. But yes, thank you, everybody, and bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Спасибо всем большое. Да, мы подходим к нашей финальной части. Да, уверена, что ваша батарейка полностью заряжена. И если вот говорить о том вот разговоре, который сейчас у нас был с Майком и с Кейт, по поводу того, что учителя должны быть properly trained для того, чтобы использовать игры, ну, в порядке рекламы, да, я, конечно, скажу, что у нас уже второй год существует Академия игропедагога. В TrendyEnglish Games мы поняли, что просто так отрывочно говорить про игры, но это не системно, потому что, ну, игры — это использование игр, это все равно, что использование, как учить грамматику, how to teach grammar, how to teach vocabulary, how to teach reading, нужно прямо вот такое вот системное обучение, вот, и у нас каждую осень запускается новый курс Академии, у нас в этом году уже второкурсники закончили Академию, да, на следующий год они уже третьекурсниками будут, то есть там есть чему учиться, да, и у нас осенью будет запускаться следующий курс Академии, ну и как мы уже говорили, а вот сейчас сейчас весной мы маленький интенсив от первую часть нашей академии в виде игр на командное образование запускаем 11 мая.